My talk is called Blessed, and it just continues for me to be blessed, to be here with you today. And you know, as much as Martin speaks of me as his friend, I speak of Martin as my friend. And we were so lucky to reconnect when we did a TEDx talk in 2016, January. And he reminded me that I had helped Emma when she had her tonsils out. I was vice principal at Beaver Run School. And they were concerned she wouldn't want to eat in the cafeteria. So I went in and checked on her. I had forgotten that, I'll be honest. But when they mentioned it, it reconnected with my brain, so I remember that now. And to be reconnected has been one of the best blessings. I wrote something recently on Facebook. No one arrives at a milestone alone. So I'm not here alone today. I have support of many, many wonderful people. Martin, Sharon, daughters being some of them. I originally wrote this talk for Faith Talks that happens during the winter months at the fountains, and Cynthia Holloway created the event for women mostly because the women's Christian group had stopped. And about 120 or so people show up. Women come, and it's $25, and you get a wonderful meal from the fountains, and then there's a speaker. And I was blessed to be a speaker one time. So as I read it mostly that day, I will probably read some of it to you today and speak about some of it. If you'd like to ask me questions later and have any comments, I'd welcome them, certainly. I profess that I am a quiet Christian, and it's probably the only quiet thing about me. I grew up in Princess Anne, and I attended Antioch Methodist Church with my family. Every Sunday I was a member of the choir. I went to MYF, Methodist Youth Fellowship, and as a senior in high school, I was even the president of the Methodist Youth Conference. And I had no idea of the importance of that role at the time. I've often thought I'd like to go back and do that again. But all of these things helped shape my religion and my path to believing in God. I was of a generation that never questioned faith. We did it because our parents did it, and it still works for me. And I thank the Lord for that my parents were Christians and helped me have my faith. Did I make mistakes as a youth? Did I give my parents gray hair? Did I swear on the basketball court? Was I unkind to undeserving people? Yes, to all of those. But yet I was very blessed. I was given a very good early life. My mother, Lula Murray Alder, was from Mount Vernon, Maryland, and she was a homemaker. And my dad, John Roy Alder, was from Sneedville, Tennessee, and I believe it had one stoplight, maybe has two now. And he left Sneedville with his family. His mom, his dad had passed away, and they moved to East Princess Anne on a farm. And he worked for the post office in Princess Anne, and he eventually became the assistant superintendent. And as a child, I would go in and hand stamp mail. He would go in and check the mail at night, and I would stand on a stool, and can you see that happening today? The other good thing about him working at the post office, he always brought Cokes home to the house. We always got one in those aluminum containers. We had Cokes, yeah. I am the youngest of 5 Alder children. I'm still the youngest. And I was very spoiled. I have to be completely honest. But I think that's the gift you get when you're the youngest child, right? You get to be spoiled. Throughout my life, the faith of my parents surrounded all of us and kept us like a protective shield. And several events during my childhood made me feel very vulnerable and made me feel like God was really not present, that He had abandoned me. This was due to losses in my early life. At age 8, my beloved grandmother Murray, my mother's mom, was moved into our dining room. And the table was put away and a hospital bed was put in. And she was there so my mom could care for her. And I loved being on her bed at night, and she would read to me. Well, one night, just after a book, I was rushed upstairs, and the doctor was called. And I remember hanging on to the banister rails upstairs and hearing all the deafening sounds of loss. And I thought that I was to blame because she had just read me a book. And I thought that for 2 or 3 years before my mother heard it voiced, and she let me know that that's not how God operates. I don't remember much after her leaving, except that our dining room was returned to its original look, and our family gatherings resumed. And I felt blessings every time my father repeated the Tennessee grace that he brought with him. And I learned all through life that those words of that grace were not just about food. My faith continued to be shaped while my dad was at work, my mother was at home, and I had such supportive siblings. There was 11 years difference between the oldest and the youngest. And sports at school, church every week, playing outside, down the street, down our basement. The routines were great, and I felt very loved and blessed. I had several more occurrences of loss on my journey to adulthood. One that still leaves an impression, and I remember so much about it, was at 9 or 10, our class lost a classmate. Bobby was from a farming family in Somerset County, and one day tragedy struck and he was killed in a tractor accident. I remember sitting on the steps of the funeral home and bawling, and that loss left a great impression on me, to lose a young life so early. And I asked my mom, why does God let these things happen? And again, assured me that's not how it works. I find it strange that our brains sometimes just retain the better parts, and you forget some of the tragic parts, but I think that's God's work, because if we lived in tragedy all the time, how would we make it? How would we live? I also had another loss as a 10th grader. My grandmother Alder passed away, and she lived just a block away from us. And I saw it unfold as I was sitting in English class, because Princess Anne, it's now a county building, but that was the original, or one of the later Washington high schools. I lived right across the street from it. I was late every day to school unless I had a boyfriend, and then I was early. But I saw this unfold. My parents thought it was better that I went to school that day. I saw the hearse at her door because I could see it from English class, and I had to be excused, and I went home. But the losses that really shook my faith were yet to come. Our family had a family Bible. It belonged to my mother, and I didn't see it often, but it came out in quiet times at our house. And I never saw my parents have an argument. It was a lot like father knows best, you know. And but I remember the quiet times, and now I look back on that, and I remember they had to be the arguments, the quiet times. I remember this one time, my mother, every week, she was given $25 by my dad, and she got her hair done and bought groceries for the week with that money. And she came home one time from the beauty parlor with, when I was 8 or 9, I noticed what color hair was. It was always gray. Probably a lot for me. But she came home one day with brown hair. And Daddy came home from Saturday rounds. And she was at the kitchen sink, of course, fixing the dinner at the right time, you know. And he looked at over at the sink and looked at my mother. Not a word was spoken. The stare, I will never forget. Well, the next day, she magically showed up at the kitchen sink with brown hair. And you know why that happened, because he was unfavorable of the change. The Bible came out a lot that week. I saw her reading it voraciously, and that was the quiet time, but there was never an argument. My dad and I had a shtick, and it was, he would say, "That's my girl," when I wasn't in trouble. And I would say, "That's my daddy." And then when I had been in trouble, I would start it, and I would say, "That's my daddy." And he'd say, "That's my girl." And then I knew I was going to be okay. He was a very hard worker. He loved people. He loved his job. He loved to interact with the public. I also saw him help people. If we were walking on the streets of Princess Anne, there would often be, his hand would go in his pocket. It would go out to the other person. And my mother was always at the church, doing church dinners, going to circle. She had friends who would come to the house. And I know that the way they treated people was what helped me learn how to treat people. My father also had a side hustle, they call it now, and he had jute boxes and pinball machines to supplement his income because the government in the 60s did not pay a lot of money. And my mother was a little bit bothered by this side hustle, but I'll tell you what it did. It provided college educations for 4 of his children. And that's why he did it, because he wanted to make sure that his children were educated. I was educated another way that I'll get to in a minute. But my parents knew what was important. Family. Family first was their byword before it got popular on Facebook. Family first. And how to treat people and the connections you make. And church. Very important. And service to the community. And I felt blessed growing up in this environment. My dad was plagued with heart disease the last 10 years of his life. And my mother protected me by not really telling me how grave it was. And they would have had many interventions today that they could have done, but not in the late 60s. He retired at age 63 in December of 66, and his health quickly deteriorated. And our dining room was transformed again into that sick room. And I went about my life being a high school senior. And there were 3 God moments. I'm not sure we called them that then, but now we call them God moments. 3 things happened in my life this particular week. And Dad was sick in the dining room. And, of course, my old brain can't remember 2 of them. But the most important one was that I had been accepted to University of Maryland College Park. And I went into his bedside, and I told Dad the 3 things. And he was able to tell me how proud he was of me. And that was the spring. And then it was March 5th, 1967. It was a beautiful Sunday. It was crisp. And that morning, Daddy was able to walk to the side steps off the dining room. And he was petting my dog, Rebel, who he loved, a little black Cocker Spaniel. And I was on my way to minstrel practice. It was a show that the Lions Club put on every year. And my sisters had sung in it and danced, and I was singing in it, and there was practice. And I said bye, and I went on to practice. In the middle of practice, my brother John showed up. And I knew it was terrible because John had been crying. I never saw him cry. 11 years older. And Daddy was gone. And I was not happy with God. It was awful. I knew deep down he probably wasn't going to get well, but I had never made the leap to the fact that I would have to be without him. And you know that thing now people say, when your heart is broken, you give all the pieces to God. Well, I wish somebody had told me that at 17, because I didn't do well. I was angry. I was broken. I was supposed to be enjoying this senior year, and none of it made any sense. And I stayed mad because it masked being so sad. And I've never liked to feel vulnerable. We tend to not want to feel so vulnerable. But I thought I'd been robbed of my father. I hated every aspect of the next few days. I heard my mother recount this process of losing Daddy. And I did not realize that all of that helped her grasp it. And every time she would start it, I would find a way to leave the house so that I didn't have to hear it again. I was so ready to get out of town and to get to Maryland that I severed some very critical relationships. And I didn't want to suffer loss, so I took control and I took care of some of these networks that I had. And I just had to get to college, and I thought, I want to get out of Princess Anne, and I don't want to have any ties here. I'll come home and see Mom. I can do that, but I don't want to be tied here. Well, you know how God works in mysterious ways? Well, he was there. One day I went to see a friend on Main Street, Princess Anne, when we had a shoe store, and that was a big deal. And one of my best friends from high school, it was summertime, it was June, was working there, and I went in to see her. And there was a fellow sitting there who I knew from high school. He had graduated the year before, but I had never had anything to, hadn't been out with him, anything. So I asked Joyce, I said, "Are you seeing him?" She said, "Oh, no." And I said, "Well, maybe ask him, tell him he can call me." Well, God did it, because the next quarter century was all laid out for me after that day. Our first date, my date with Tommy Foxwell, was on June 24th, 1967, and I never dated anybody else in college. And I never had that dating college experience because he was either coming on the weekend or I was going home. We were married in 1972, and we lived and worked in Princess Anne, near our families for the first 12 years, and in 1983 we moved to Salisbury. I was a teacher. I worked in my own school that I had attended as a child, and we had three perfect children, and a good marriage, and family support, and friends, and we just felt blessed. We were, on the top of the world, so they say. And all was good until March 1988, and Tommy's headaches began. And I'd suffered from migraines, which I still do occasionally, and we really didn't think much about it, because I thought, okay, you've got a headache, just, go to work, let's keep going on. But then other symptoms arose, and by my birthday, April 4th, in 1988, he asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I said, "I just need you to go to the doctor." And that was the beginning of finding out that he had glioblastoma, which was the most aggressive form of brain cancer that John McCain is suffering with right now. And how do I say this? It was devastating, because all I wanted was a guidebook, but there was none, because the ending is too sad. He lasted 10.5 months, and he died on February 23rd, the day before his 41st birthday. Where was God now? I was turning 40. I loved my husband. The kids love their dad. I'd only been married for 16 and a half years. Where are you, God, in the midst of this? What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to be a mother and a father to 12, 9, and 7? How in the world can I do this? Well, I'll tell you where God was. I'm sure many of you have heard the poem Footsteps, and it tells of the Lord walking alongside while someone goes through life and leaves footprints until one day there's only one set of footprints. And the person asks God where he was during the lowest parts of his life. And God's response is this: my precious child, I love you, and I will never leave you, never ever during your trials and tests. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. And I started being carried, not to my knowing, the minute of the diagnosis. He was there for Tommy because his illness was in a part of the brain that it never allowed him to look at me and say, why me? For which I am very grateful to the Lord. We had a decent summer as a family, although it was an altered reality. And I'll leave it at that. I grieved secretly. God sent a neighbor to take us on his yacht because Tommy loved the water, and we had 3 kids, and they knew we'd enjoy it, and he did. We had a wonderful day that day. We had our family support at every juncture. I really would like to go back and be able to support Tommy's parents more, because I had no idea the pain they were in. I was too busy with my own pain and taking care of my children. But I know that it was excruciating for them. And I survived. And little by little, as you go through these horrible, horrible crises of life, somehow you go on. And I know for me, it was with God's help. And it was through the support that he sent to people. I had a mother, a parent. I was teaching 2nd grade at Pinehurst. And I had a mother who called one day. You didn't have cell phones then running around, but they called me from the office, said, you've got to call Grace, come take it. And it was my wonderful friend, and she was asking me where a pan was. I said, a pan? Where are you? She says, I'm at your house. I said, what are you doing at my house? She says, oh, Brian and I are here cleaning your house for you. That's what God does. He sends those people when you least expect it. It was such a joy to have people like that around me. All I did was survive those 10.5 months. I put one foot in front of the other. I put on a bold face. I acted like I had it together. I still went to work. People tried to give me sick days because I was running out of them. And they would say, we just want to give some of our sick days to Grace so she will still get paid. God again. I know that we get over things, and people don't mean to say things like, oh, you'll be okay, or you'll go on. Well, you do get over them, but when you suffer a loss or you're in a crisis with an illness or a terrible tragedy, it's all you think about. That is your focus. That's what happens. And you never really ever get over loss. Someone told me that, said, Grace, you won't ever get over it, but you'll learn to live with it. And it does start to walk beside you. And what mattered to me was that my faith was on the other side. God was walking on the other side to help me get through this. And I wasn't aware of it. I wasn't thanking God every day. I am aware of it fully now. And I'm so very grateful. And that's why I feel that I'm blessed. I didn't like being a statistic. I didn't like being a widow. I didn't like people walking up to me and I'm thinking, I'm taking them to a sad place. I'm used to making people laugh and making them happy. And now when they encounter me, all they can think of is poor Grace. I didn't like that at all. Sometime I had to realize, and I didn't realize at the time, that when kindness comes to you, you need to embrace it and be grateful for it and have that attitude of gratitude, because I was kind of pushing people off. I was saying, I'm a woman. I'm a teacher. I'm a mom. I was a wife. I can do all it. I've got it, people. Instead of saying, thank you from the bottom of my toes. Thank you for everything you're doing for me. And that's part of my talk now, that I tell people to be grateful. In 1992, some of the fog started to lift. I did the thing, I went to counseling. I asked my doctors, how am I going to get through this? I had lots of support. And life went on. And friends of friends introduced me to Mike Murdock, my present husband. And he was fun and he was smart. And he'd been to islands. I'd never been to an island, Deal Island, but I'd never been to an island. He'd been to blue water and white sand. So it was all very enamoring. We were married in 1995, and he brought 2 bonus daughters to my life who gave me my first grandchildren, and that's just wonderful. But he went through something with me before we got married that was again made me question what God was doing. I lost my mom in 1993, and because I was so busy being strong and being a teacher and raising my children, I really had not grieved Tommy's loss. So when Mother died, I was a mess again. And I went to counseling because I'm a big fan of counselors, because they go through this all the time. They're trained. And I felt very vulnerable again to go and pour my heart out and say how broken I felt. But they helped me. She has since left town, but she was wonderful and helped me. And things that she told me then, I've shared with people later, and I hope it helps them. And Mike was a great support when he went through this with me. I almost dismissed the relationship with him because the same thing was playing out again, that I don't want to suffer any more loss. But the counselor helped me see that I deserved to be happy in another regard. My mother was a Stoic, and she taught me some of that too. You take what is dealt with you and you do the best you can, and you will work through it and you'll be okay. I didn't realize she was a role model, having lost her husband, for a role that I didn't ask to play. She was a great support to me, as were my brothers and my whole family. One of the things, her favorite Bible verse was Psalm 23. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. I didn't like anything about this table when I lost Mother. I was not able to see that I was going to be able to manage without that unconditional support. But again, the counselor helped me, and he helped me put one foot in front of the other, and he helped me put pieces of my heart back together. And what ensued after the tragedy of losing people, what happens is there are wonderful events that take place that you need to grab and hold on to. And that's why we put fabulous pictures on Facebook. I'm convinced of it, so that we can remember those moments and revisit them when things are not joyous. You remember that other good things will happen. I had graduations. There were home runs hit. There were marriages and births of my children, my sister's children. Wonderful things. And one thing I can tell you that God did for me, little retrospect, was choosing my career. God helped me to become and have a wonderful career as a teacher, because he was with me at University of Maryland in my Chemistry 1 class. Let me tell you how I know he was there. Because he helped me flunk chemistry. Because I was signed up to be a nurse. I wasn't meant to be a nurse. I was meant to be a teacher. That daggone F on my grade slip took me 3 sciences to get off that grade slip. But God helped me. I got through 3 more sciences, and I became a teacher, and I was blessed with a wonderful career. After my retirement in 2011, I had been to all the seminars, and it said, make sure you have something to do. Make sure you have a plan, because after retirement, your whole life is going to change, and you're going to feel different about your purpose in life. And I thought, sure, I know, I'll be fine. I was a wreck. As soon as I retired, I missed my friends. I missed helping children. I missed being a problem solver. I missed being needed. And I did not know what to do with myself. And I thought, that guy was right. I should have paid attention. So luckily, a principal called me to come in and do some consulting work for a short time with some teachers. My last job was new teacher coach, where I helped new teachers succeed. It was the best job I ever had after the classroom. And she called me in to work with a few select teachers. And that helped me a great deal. And then tragedy struck in December 2012, Sandy Hook, where the educators and kids were taken. And my niece lives in Sandy Hook, Beth Ann. And I called her immediately and I said, Beth, I can't believe what's happening in the news. And her kids had been through that school, but they were grown. They were older. And I said, what are we going to do? We need to find something to help. And I had seen a post on Facebook, Mr. Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, who's about to have a 50th anniversary. And there was a post, and he was told by his mother when he was young that whenever there's a tragedy to look for the helpers. And I was compelled to be a helper, to help in some way. And I am convinced God put me on this path. Because how do things happen? You don't just willy-nilly think of something. It comes to you. And I was put on this wonderful journey by figuring out how to make a bracelet that you could move beads on to count kind acts. And I put a kindness charm on it. And I thought, and you can move the beads toward the kindness charm, and then every night you reflect on what kind of day you had, and you move the beads back. And this developed, and I made a few. I had a lot of awful prototypes, but I made a few. And I sent them to Beth Ann and Sandy Hook. I sent about a dozen. I could have sent 1,000. They needed it so much. And I had no idea that it would turn into a business, that I'm still making kindness bracelets today and selling them at 5 locations, and sometimes out of the back of my car in a parking lot. That looks really cute. But the journey doesn't stop there, that I made a bracelet and I'm selling them. I realized it was not going to pay my house payment or my car payment. So I thought, well, you know, when people win the lottery, some of them give money away. So I thought, I'll just give this away. That'll be fun. So I started writing little checks to people who were going to treatments back and forth to Baltimore, because there are lots of things they need money for that they don't have. Gas and, food on the road and all of that. So that was wonderful. Not a lot of hoopla about it, but I would send the check, but I would put on Facebook the people who were buying bracelets, I would say, move a bead because you gave a donation today. Because without people who buy them, I don't have the funds to do anything with. And then I read about a project that a little boy in Pennsylvania thought of called Buddy Benches. And they are benches that are placed on the playgrounds so that if a child sits on a bench, he doesn't have anybody to play with, the whole school and the whole student body knows. They go over and they say, do you want to play? So no one's alone. Because I'm convinced it's the children who are left alone who go and do terrible things like Sandy Hook. So I thought, how wonderful, full circle, that this horrible tragedy would create something positive. And the rest of the benches will be placed on Wicomico playgrounds this spring, and they will also be put in my home county. And the CTE people built them, the kids. The older kids built them for the younger kids. And along with every bench goes kindness books, a stack of books for teachers to have resources to tell about kindness. Now, I am no more special than anybody sitting in this room. God helped me do this. I'm convinced that He led me to this journey, and that's why I feel so blessed to be able to do this for people. I always think of my mother when she would say, surround yourself with people who raise you up. And then she would add to it and say, and you be one of those people. Again, blessed. It doesn't just happen. It's offered. And it's for you to decide what you'll do with it. There are new ideas that go along with this bracelet. If you had told me in 2012 I'd still be sitting at a table purchasing beads and charms, which are so much fun, and still stringing beads on cord while my husband watches TV and I'm making bracelets, I would have said, oh, pshaw, that's not going to happen. I'll do something else. But all I need is for one person to come to me and say, Grace, I gave that bracelet to my granddaughter, and she came to the table and told me how many beads she'd moved and how it happened. And that is a wonderful feeling. Because kindness, if we look at it, if we notice it, it's all around us. But we can ignore it. You can miss the thank yous. You can miss the pleases. You can miss somebody letting you in traffic. You can miss all of it. There's scientific research that says when you're kind, when you see it, when you give it, or when you offer it, it produces hormones in our brain that helps our heart. And so you're better off for it. And I want people to think intentionally about kindness all the time. I have devised a new mission called Wicomico Grows Kindness because I had so many projects going on that someone said, Grace, you need to call it something. You can't say speaker here, speaker there, project here. So Wicomico Grows Kindness is a Facebook page that I have, and I try to get everything positive to land on that page so that people know if you connect to that page, you'll see what either has happened or may happen to build up our community. And that's positive happening in Wicomico County and Salisbury. There are new ideas that are coming. I still feel very blessed. I still say I'm a quiet Christian. I hope that my actions and my service to the community speak for me. As more heartbreak will come, I'll have these other things that I know will help me through it. I chose the same Colossians verse today that you've already heard. Clothe yourselves in kindness. And love is the most important thing. And as hard as it is to give sometimes, we still need to keep that at the center. I'll read it again. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. I'm convinced that with these qualities, and that if you do an act for someone else, a kind act for yourself, and maybe a kind act for a perfect stranger, you will feel the benefits of kindness. My friend Bob Vitruber, who spoke to the group a few weeks ago, has this saying that he uses from Mother Teresa: every kind act is a prayer. And to that he adds, every prayer is a kind act. And I agree with both of these things. I stand before you as testimony that God is trustworthy and He'll provide paths for you. And it's up to you how you respond to His offers. So I hope for you that you'll go forth with God's help and may kindness find you every day. And learn from me, when kindness comes to you, be grateful for it and accept it and embrace it. And feeling blessed to be here with all of you today, I want to share that Tennessee grace with you that my brother just last night recited at our house. Dear Lord, make us thankful for these and all the blessings we are about to receive for Christ's sake. Amen. Thank you very much.